Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the third eagle of the apocalypse and the co-prophet of these end times. This will be part 4 in my series on the amazing end times prophecies of Zachariah, as found in his chapters 12, 13, and 14, which are mainly intended for the modern nation of Israel, which really concern all of us, because he talks a great deal about our Lord Jesus Christ's coming at the Battle of Armageddon. And now we've already looked at verses 1 through 6 of Zechariah's chapter 12, and we found that the first 2 verses describe the Daniel 9 war, which Israel will lose. Verses 3 and 4 describe the Ezekiel 38 war, where our Lord returns to save Israel. And verses 5 and 6, which describe the wars of liberation of the governors of Judah, which refers to the prime ministers from David Ben-Gurion all the way down to our current Israeli prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. And now in this program, I want to look at the next 2 sections of Zechariah chapter 12. That would be verses 7 and 8, and 9, 10, and 11. And we need to discover which wars Zechariah is talking about in these sections. And in order to better understand that, in order to find out which wars he is talking about, I made a little chart which described the characteristics of both the Daniel 9 war and the Ezekiel 38 war. The Daniel 9 war occurs at the beginning of the tribulation, whereas the Ezekiel 38 war occurs at the end of tribulation. Israel will lose the Daniel 9 war, but Jesus returns to save Israel in the Ezekiel 38 war. The Daniel 9 war is between Israel and her nearby nations, whereas during the Ezekiel 38 war, Jesus will defeat all the nations of the world, or as he says, all the tribes of the world will mourn when they see me coming. During the Daniel 9 war, Israel is divided, whereas during the Ezekiel 38 war, Israel is united. The Daniel 9 war is a judgment by God upon Israel, whereas during the Ezekiel 38 war, Jesus, as I said, returns to save the nation at the Battle of Armageddon. So now we are ready to look at the last 5 verses of this first 11-verse section of Zechariah 12 to determine which war Zechariah is talking about. And we are going to discover something truly amazing. We are going to discover another verse which describes our Lord's second coming. And no other Bible scholar has ever understood this passage. And the Lord shall save the tabernacles of Judah. So right away we have a pretty good indication that this is going to describe our Lord's return at the Battle of Armageddon, where Jesus rescues Israel. As in the beginning that the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem may not boast and magnify themselves against Judah. So Jerusalem and Judah will be united in this particular struggle. Another good indication that this is the Ezekiel 38 war. In that day shall the Lord protect the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Again, another verification. And he that has offended, now this word offended in some Bibles can mean weak or feeble. He that has offended among them in that day shall be as David, and the house of David as that of God, as an angel of the Lord in their sight. Who is this he that has offended? The he that offended among them in this passage refers to none other than Jesus Christ our Lord himself. And no other Bible scholar, to my knowledge, has ever understood this critical passage of Jesus' return at Armageddon. And we should not be surprised that he is described as weak or feeble or as offensive to the Jews. Many of them rejected him for that reason. And Isaiah describes our Lord in very much the same terms in his chapter 53, verse number 3. Despised and rejected by men. And verse number 12. He was counted among sinners. But now Zechariah gives the good word, and that is how he will appear to the Jews and the nation of Israel in these end times. He shall be as David. Jesus will return as a victorious king. As that of God, he will appear as divine. There will be no mistaking our Lord's nature and identity this time. As an angel of the Lord in their sight. Jesus' return at Armageddon will be with power and glory. As we go through these last 3 end-time chapters of Zechariah, we are going to find many more descriptions of Jesus which are unusual, but at the same time fascinating and very revealing, and very important for us in these end times. And now let's look at verses 9, 10, and 11 of Zechariah's chapter 12. And what war is Zechariah describing in this passage? And it shall come to pass in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. So we know right away this is not the Daniel 9 war, because all the nations are involved. And I will pour out upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So here we see the house of David and Jerusalem unified. This is a characteristic of the Ezekiel 38 war, as is all the nations being involved. The spirit of grace and of prayers, and they shall look upon me. Remember, this is God speaking, whom they have pierced. An obvious reference to Jesus' crucifixion. In other words, God the Father and God the Son are the same. And they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. Jesus is the only Son of God. And they shall grieve over him, as the manner is to grieve for the death of the firstborn. This is very similar to the Passover, where an unblemished lamb is sacrificed. In that day there shall be a great lamentation in Jerusalem, like the lamentation of Adadramman in the plain of Megiddo. Obviously, Zechariah is talking about the Battle of Armageddon. So in conclusion, even though we know from Zechariah's hidden verse structure that these are 2 separate sections, these last 5 verses, they do indeed describe the same event, and that is our Lord's return at Armageddon, although from slightly different viewpoints. And now, in my next part, part 5, we will be looking at the second 11-verse section of Zechariah. And as always, if you would like to know more about the prophecies of Daniel, please visit my new ThirdEagleMedia.com website, where I have unsealed all of his great prophecies of these end times.